Love and Hate. A story spanning 8.5 decades. 1936 was a different era. The Great Depression hammering the US and world economy. 3 years before the Second World War, the SABC took its first tentative broadcasting step with no news service. 1951. The war had ended and it marked new beginnings.
Again, just count down so I can listen to
The SABC's first news radio bulletin went live.
The number you gave me is in South Africa.
Its seventh CEO has the recollection of the past.
The SABC was actually the first in the world to put up a wide and a national network of FM stations. But the main thing was that made it possible to have more frequencies available so that services in the indigenous, all the black languages could be introduced. The frequencies were there.
Reporting on parliament debates in the early 50s, an invitation for political interference a decade later.
Then the SABC became a political animal. It moved from a reflector to persuader. And they were talking to the white population and they tried to persuade them to accept the separate development as a good thing for the country.
A broadcaster used as a mouthpiece to defend apartheid in all its vicious forms. 1976 was a seminal year. The Soweto Student Uprising.
The South African Broadcasting Corporation.
And finally, the introduction of television. 40 years behind the rest of the developed world.
Yes, the 5th of January 1976 has finally arrived, and with it the birth of a full television service.
There was such excitement after all these years that South Africans just hear about TV. The excitement was huge, and it was a great thing for the country.
The National Party understood that controlling communications was key to its grip on power.
Nou by die stadium gekom waar televisie deel van ons daaglikse lewe.
Political interference was ingrained in the SABC of yore. On television, English and Afrikaans, the only languages on air.
Goeienaand.
But 5 more languages were introduced in 1981.
That made it possible that the black population could for the first time also have, soapies or films or TV series.
Long overdue. More changes were needed. The 1980s negotiations and the 1990s transition of power.
As you know, when it was founded based on apartheid policies. And Africans were not in management positions, were not in charge. And also it was relegated down there, issues that are affecting especially Black South African people.
It was actually a very special period from 1990 to 1993 because the ANC was unbanned and new political leaders came to the fore and they showed their muscle and that things will change.
Before 1994, I always refused to be interviewed by the SABC. I would not set my foot in the buildings of the SABC.
Just before the dawn of democracy, the National Party still wanted the SABC in its corner.
And we said, no, we are there for everyone. So we did not favor the National Party to the ANC. The National Party and the SABC, then actually our relationship became very sour.
1994 marked a sea change in the SABC's checkered history.
At that time, if somebody saw a story on the SABC, they would rush to go and buy the newspapers to confirm if the story was true or not, or if it was still some more government propaganda. So at that time, the circulation of newspapers was at its highest.
Then there were a lot of channels that were not there. We managed to put in Morning Live together. We managed to put in news on cell phones. Managed to put in SABC news.com.
We covered a number of elections. We covered the Truth Commission. And, we did a lot of work, I think, to restructure, particularly radio news, to make it better suited to, the new democracy. I mean, we inherited an organization where African language stations were really under-resourced and where there was no tradition of independent journalism.
New management looked to penetrate the overseas market.
Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, Queens, New York.
And so we established 13 bureaus and also we established SABC News International.
Ba hopula hore sena se keke sa hlola se etsahala ke le hana tsotetsi SABC Kuto Carnival Angola.
All SABC TV stations relaunched in February 1996.
One of the basic things that we agreed on universally inside the SABC was that it would be independent of political interference.
Fast forward to mid-2016, a black era of interference and news muzzling. This kind of visuals spent on air. But a group of journalists stood up, the SABC 8.
As you can remember, we were moving towards the local government elections. And so it was our understanding that this is now an attempt to control the narrative around the state of South Africa. If you are not going to show the discontent on the ground, then what is your role as a media?
Proper news, not propaganda!
ICASA also intervened, and the voiceless were heard once more. But there was a climate of fear within. A report detailing employees being terrorized.
It was awful. No nation should allow this abuse to happen, and we all keep quiet.
And then,
the management team was not engaged.
The SABC's financial woes laid bare. Employees taking the fall amid the Section 189 process.
Consultation was done with it. The retrenchment exercise, of course, was deeply tragic, and one can only feel the pain of people who had to move out, and I think the pain of the organization as a whole.
And a view that the ship is being turned around.
Financially, we are in a much better position. You may have seen that for the first time in 5 years, we managed to record a profit, and quarter one of this current fiscal was even better because we registered 5% growth against budget and over 52% growth in terms of sales against last year.
But today's decisions have a direct impact on the future. Even news gathering and language inclusivity cannot be ignored.
Outside the 11 official languages, there's also Kuntali and Kwedam that are used in broadcast for XKFM viewers in the Northern Cape. So we need to look beyond what we do now and ask ourselves what more is still requiring our attention in terms of how we serve the public.
And more self-introspection needed.
We're still restricted in terms of how we provide for some of the languages, particularly where news and current affairs is concerned. You have languages that have limited exposure in terms of television that go to air only 5 days a week and they still alternate slot. We should not be talking about that when other languages are on air 7 days a week. And in fact, one of the languages, which is English, is on air 24 hours, which is the 18-hour live cycle we have on the news channel.
The SABC digital news has done quite well, more especially now that we are in a digital era and a lot of people are looking for news, quick news, or to receive the news in a faster way before radio or before TV. And that's why it helps us that our journalists, our SABC News journalists, are also tweeting and posting things when they are at at a story or on site, which allows people to actually see the live information coming in on breaking the news before waiting to see it on TV or on radio.
The SABC is really key in where South Africa is and where South Africa will be going. So it's a very important milestone, 85 years. And as employees, we're working very closely with all key stakeholders to ensure that this critical institution of our country is sustainable, financially viable, so that 85 years later, it can continue to serve the next generation.
It's been a whirlwind of journey.
Goeienaand en welkom by die nuus om 8 op Maandag 17 Junie.
A journey of feasts, of breaking news, of exclusivity, of tears and joy. A story of failure and success, but equally, the SABC is the story of people, our people. Maageketla Mohlabe, SABC News, Johannesburg.